The lives of millions of people changed forever. The streets of the city were flooded with terrifying mutants. The zombies were hungry and searching for survivors. Anyone could be infected, even pregnant women who lost their babies. Those who managed to survive tried to fight for survival, so explosions and gunshots were constantly heard in the city. There was a real army of the dead on the streets looking for their victims. The main character was hiding in his house. Finally, the explosion stopped, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Now he needed to get to the shelter as quickly as possible, because another series of explosions could start at any moment. He was in such a hurry that he fell and almost broke his leg. The boy tried to gather the most necessary things he could take with him. First of all, these were maps and addresses of the city. When he had packed his briefcase, he began to prepare to leave his home. He had to create improvised armor for himself out of books to protect the vulnerable parts of his body. In addition, he armed himself with weapons he made himself from what he had. Now that he was ready, his great journey was about to begin. He felt that the smell of gas was getting stronger, so he needed to escape from the house as quickly as possible. He knew that there weren't many zombies behind the house, so he chose this route for his escape. It was very scary, but he had no other choice. Besides, his mother was waiting for him, so he gathered his strength and began to climb down. The boy began to sway from side to side, and it seemed that his rope was not very reliable. But he had been preparing for this day for a very long time. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion in his house. Now his rope broke and the boy began to fall to the ground. A few days ago, no one could have imagined that humanity was on the verge of a huge catastrophe. Strange flashes were observed in the sun, which could lead to power outages and unstable internet service. Many doctors and professors were convinced that humanity would face mass extinction. The first and most famous case was the extinction of the dinosaurs. Meanwhile, at an elite club, security guards observed a man who was behaving very strangely. First, the unknown man changed his clothes on the street, then left his belongings in a trash can. After that, he simply went into the club and carried a strange bag with him the whole time. They watched him closely the whole time, trying to see his face. In fact, he had an important meeting. He had to present a plan for developing a new game. For this, he wanted to receive a generous reward. But his client looked at him in surprise after he named the price of his product. The man agreed to pay $500,000 for the perfect plan. And this amount was almost twice as much as the main character wanted from the very beginning. Director Cao was very thoughtful and cautious, so he prepared a special flash drive that could not be tracked. Now Cao asked for the bill for lunch, but the main character wanted to pay himself because he had invited him. The amount was so large that he simply did not have the money to pay. The restaurant only accepted cash, and the hero wanted to try to pay by card. Director Cao had a VIP card, so he decided to pay for him. They agreed on this, and now Cao will wait for good news and a good job. As they left the restaurant, an expensive car similar to a Mercedes arrived for the director. He offered to give the main character a ride, but the guy refused. In fact, he didn't want to go with him because he had other plans. After saying goodbye to Director Cao, he realized that he felt very good. He was in a good mood because of the successful deal he had managed to conclude. But when he tried to find his bag with his belongings, he realized that it was no longer there. He had hidden it in a trash can, and at that very moment the city was being cleaned up and his belongings were being taken to the dump. There were strong flashes in the sun all the time, and scientists were observing all this. Airplanes were in the greatest danger because their electronics began to fail. Suddenly, one of the passengers became very ill, and when the flight attendant approached him, she saw a horrific scene. It was forever etched in her memory. Another passenger bit him, so people began to panic and were afraid to continue flying. But it was too late, because in the cockpit, people had long since turned into terrifying mutants. So the plane began to fall. Meanwhile, the main character couldn't catch up with his bag, but he was so tired that he went into a local store to buy some water. The water was too expensive for him, and besides, his phone stopped working. And when he turned it on, he saw 13 missed calls. He had to pay for his own housing. He thought for a long time before calling her, because he had no money. But suddenly, his wife called him herself and started asking a lot of questions. In the end, he couldn't take it anymore and yelled at her, because he was losing a good opportunity to make money due to his lack of funds. Yangjin warned him that if he didn't find 50,000 by the evening, the whole deal would be canceled. Without explaining anything, she hung up. Now he didn't know what to do or where to find such a large sum of money. He had no idea what terrible things were happening in space. There were giant solar flares, which had a huge impact on Earth and all of humanity. This was especially noticeable high above sea level. One group of climbers who were climbing the mountains had no idea what was happening. They moved one after another and kept their usual pace. Suddenly, Yuzu felt ill and began to lose consciousness. The others tried to understand what had happened and wanted to help him. Yuzu tried to speak, but his words were slurred and no one could understand him. Suddenly, he bit his friend who was trying to help him. Meanwhile, everything was calm in the city of Binhai, and no one paid attention to the flashes in the sun. At the company where the main character worked, the working day was coming to an end. Everyone had already left, but he stayed until the very end. And when the lights went out, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. He had to sit under the table the whole time so that his colleagues wouldn't notice him. He was lucky because his boss's office was open. He didn't rush because he knew there were a lot of hidden cameras in the room. So he had to spend a lot of time hacking into the cameras and turning them off. But nothing worked. The video was of very poor quality, so he couldn't see the password. As it turned out, the director was still at the company and was about to return to his office at that very moment. The main character had scattered books around, so he tried to put everything back the way it was so that no one would notice his presence. Just then, his wife called him, but he was angry, so he just yelled. At that moment, Wong hung up the phone and his wife had to sign the agreement. But he ruined everything again. Nothing worked out, and the man was just angry about the time he had to spend. Yang Jin wanted him to stay. She wanted to try to explain everything, but no one listened to her. Suddenly, an unknown man appeared and greeted them. Yang Jin seemed to know him and was very surprised when she saw the guy in front of her. He introduced himself as her boyfriend and apologized for being late and said he was going to give her the 50,000 needed for the deal. The man was very happy, but Yang Jin's face showed surprise and fear. But the stranger reassured her it was his plan. Meanwhile, Wang had only one attempt left to enter the password. Otherwise, the system would lock up. He tensed up and still managed to do it. Now he had to find the file and send it to the flash drive, but suddenly he heard the director's voice approaching his office. The boy was very frightened because the large file would not have time to be sent before he entered. Strange things were happening not only in the mountains or on planes. The same thing was happening at bus stations. The security guards who worked there felt very ill, and strange things were happening to their bodies. Their skin color changed, and they were constantly tormented by fatigue and nausea. One of the workers fell to his knees, and another tried to help him. The man wanted to help him up. But as soon as he approached his friend, the latter immediately lunged at him and bit off a piece of flesh. The men ended up under the wheels of a heavy train. A terrible tragedy had occurred. As it turned out, the director had brought a girl with him with whom he wanted to spend the night. He thought there was no one in the office, so he intended to lock himself in his office. They started kissing, without even going inside. Wong hid right under the table and watched what was happening. After a few hours, it was over. Now he had a chance to escape. Wong crawled out from under the table and tried to run, but he couldn't. A girl saw him and started screaming in fear. The director was angry when he saw him, but Wong tried to convince him that he had returned to work even harder. After what happened, he just went home and left the office. His thoughts wouldn't leave him alone, and he couldn't forget what he had seen. And if he got fired because of what happened, his family would be on the verge of poverty because he was the only one who could earn money. He came back very late, but no one was home. His wife didn't meet him, so he just wanted to go to his room to go to bed. But suddenly, the lights came on in the house. Wong was very frightened because he thought they were criminals. In fact, it was Yang Jin who had been waiting for him at home the whole time. Wong promised to find the money so they could pay for the house, but he spent it on stocks, which ended up crashing. In addition, he took money from their family savings, which was needed for Yang Jin's father's surgery. He did not have the best relationship with her parents because from the very beginning, they did not like him at all. It seemed that Yang Jin was only now beginning to understand them, and was also angry with her husband, whom she once loved so much. Now he started talking about his father, who, unlike hers, had never been a gangster and had never killed anyone. These words hurt her deeply, so she started calling him names and pressuring him again. Wong couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't listen to her anymore, so he wanted to hit her. But at the last moment, he stopped. Yang Jin no longer loved him and couldn't stand to be around him, so she wanted to break up. So she just packed her things and left their house. Suddenly, she ran into that same man. He returned the phone she had left in his car. It started raining, so he offered her a ride. Yang Jin thought he was very suspicious, but she agreed anyway. She got into his car and accepted the help he offered. The next day, the main character was spending time at home. However, his phone started ringing off the hook. He was receiving a bunch of messages about a dangerous flu, so he was advised to stay home. His mother knew that he was going to buy a house, but Wong lost all his money and now didn't know what to say. He understood that he had lost everything: his family, his money, his wonderful wife, and his future. Now his life had changed, and his mother hated him for what he had done. Wong tried to remain calm, but he simply couldn't take it anymore. He smashed his phone so he wouldn't have to hear her voice anymore. He did nothing until evening and didn't even leave the house, so he slept until morning. But he woke up because he remembered he was late for work. He also realized that he shouldn't rush, because this was probably his last day. 20 minutes later, he was rushing to the company because he remembered that he needed to pick up his things. At first, he was going to enter quietly so as not to attract attention, but he didn't succeed. Also, the director was looking for him and was waiting for him in his office at that very moment. Wang was very scared, but he had no other choice, so he decided to go to him. The young man braced himself, thinking that at that moment he would receive a severe punishment. The director shook his hand, and at that moment, the young man held his breath. But everything changed when the director announced that he had been appointed the new head of their strategic department. He was completely surprised, but Wang couldn't pass up this opportunity and agreed to take the new position. He hadn't expected this at all, so he thanked the man for the promotion. As he left the office, he was greeted by a crowd applauding the new head of the strategic department. This day was special for him because he had long dreamed of becoming the head of an entire department. He wanted to share the news with his wife, but he didn't dare to call her first after what had happened. When his phone rang, Wang thought it was her and was very happy. However, the number was unknown, and he did not know who it really was. But it was an insurance company announcing a new type of insurance. Wang did not have a car, so when he heard them, he became very angry. Yang Jin lay alone in bed and thought about what had happened. She also began to miss her husband, and when the phone rang, she was very happy. She thought it was him. It was her mother, to whom she told everything that had happened. In addition, she learned that her father had fallen ill, but it was just the flu, and her mother assured her that everything would be fine. Cases of an unknown infection continued in the city, and soon many people were coming to the hospital. There were even cases of infection on the street. It happened to a man who couldn't get up and go home. When they tried to help him, they noticed that something was wrong with his face. It scared his friend very much. Now he rushed at him and began to bite, tearing pieces of flesh from his face and neck. Meanwhile, the main character overslept for work again. But now he couldn't be late because he was the boss. The news was not encouraging. There were many new cases of virus infection being reported around the world. Many people were dying and disappearing. There were too many people on the bus, so the main character felt sick. He needed to get some fresh air. Suddenly, among the crowd, he saw a very strange woman who was biting others. Her face had changed. It was covered in bloodstains. People began to panic and run away because there were a huge number of infected people, and they were all attacking and killing people. Everyone was trying to save their lives. But besides the sick people, there was another danger. Animals had also caught the virus and were infected. The sick mutants caught up with people and tore them to pieces, leaving no chance to hide or escape. Dogs bit off parts of their bodies, causing severe pain. But it was just a dream that the man had. He was so scared that he sweated, and his wife tried to bring him to his senses. She was very scared when she saw him in such a state, but he didn't understand anything and didn't know if it was really happening. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was Halloween that evening, so they decided it was children coming for candy. And in order to scare them too, they put on costumes and went to open the door. But behind the door, it was much scarier. They were real mutants, ready to tear them to pieces. They attacked people who didn't even suspect anything and began to bite them and tear off pieces of flesh. Panic and screams broke out throughout the city. The mutants were everywhere, even in the water. People knew nothing about the new virus and the epidemic, so, unaware of the danger, they were relaxing on the beach. Suddenly, a girl began to drown. The boy who was next to her was very frightened. To help her, he ran into the water and tried to save her. He didn't know what danger awaited him in the water. And at that moment, the zombies started biting him. The man didn't understand anything and thought it was a shark, but now his life was doomed. In addition, the news reported discouraging information about the consequences of solar flares. Wang felt very ill again, but finally he managed to get to work. He hurried inside because he was half an hour late. Now, the director was looking for him. As it turned out, they wanted to fire him. In addition, the director decided to frame him and accused him of sexually harassing all the female employees in their department. Wang couldn't believe what he was hearing because he hadn't done anything and hadn't even spent a single day in his new position. The man didn't even deny that he was trying to pin the blame on him. He had to save his reputation and preserve the company at all costs. After all, only Wang knew what was going on in the company. He was the only witness. Now, the director had prepared a huge list of accusations against him with the names of his victims. The young man didn't even know many of them. Now his life was ruined. The director threatened to fire him and also planned to sue him for trying to steal information. Instead, he offered to let the boy go if he kept quiet and didn't tell anyone what had happened. Meanwhile, Yang Jin was invited to a special conference, which was very prestigious. She went there with her new friend, who had become a real star because he was very experienced and intelligent. They drank with him to a bright future. The events moved to the main character's house, which was also infected with zombies. The evil creatures even attacked dogs. They bit them and tore their bodies to pieces. Nothing could stop them. And very quickly, the infection spread throughout the city and the whole world. And when the main character returned to his own house, He saw with his own eyes all the horror that was happening there. The boy couldn't believe his eyes. Was it really happening? And it wasn't a dream? Fear gripped him. He knew that an ordinary old man lived in the house who could never harm anyone. The next day, he managed to overcome his fear and convince himself that it wasn't real. He went looking for a new job because he had no money. Before that, he went to a meeting with his client and accused him of the flash drive not being reliable because the director had found out about everything. He wanted the client to confess everything himself or pay him damages and hire him. However, the man promised to recommend the protagonist to another company, which was a large corporation. Wang had no other options, so he trusted him again. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to a strange man who was riding with him on the bus. He immediately noticed that the old man was ill, and when he lost consciousness, everyone thought that Wang had pushed him. They were about to help him when suddenly the old man started biting the people around him. Wang couldn't believe his eyes. Again, that same color of his face and the same aggressive behavior he had seen before. He saw the old man begin to turn into a mutant, so he had to jump back to avoid putting himself in danger and ending up in the danger zone. Wang saw with his own eyes how the old man bit off the fingers of one of the women. Meanwhile, the relationship between Yang Jin and her new acquaintance was developing rapidly. Hu Haoran asked her out on a date in the middle of the workday. Then he confessed that he liked her very much and felt a strong attraction to her. He wanted her to be his girlfriend and considered himself a successful man who could take care of her and provide for her. But even at that moment, she was thinking about her ex and really wanted to call him. However, the main character's phone was turned off, so he did not answer her calls. Therefore, she decided to try again and took Hu Haoran's phone. But even that didn't help, which meant that the main character's phone had stopped working. She thought about Hu Haoran's proposal for a long time, which made him very nervous. Still, she agreed to be with him and become his girlfriend. Hu Haoran was so happy about this that he hugged her. He believed that she liked him too. But in reality, she didn't love him and just burst into tears because she realized that she wasn't sincere towards him. Nevertheless, she was able to calm down and stopped crying. But when she looked up, she saw Wang in front of her, who had seen everything and was just looking at them. At the space station, they tried to determine the strength of the solar flares and investigate their impact on humanity. Now, the flares had reached their maximum level of danger, so they were going to send an urgent message to the government. In addition, the flares were so strong that they reached the planet in a matter of minutes. As a result, people on Earth could see the aurora borealis on all continents. They had no idea what this meant and what danger it posed. Because of the solar flares, many people turned into zombies and all hell broke loose in the city. People screamed and begged to be saved. They tried to run away, but it was useless. The zombies killed everyone in their path. The police officers who tried to stop them couldn't do anything. At that moment, Cao was riding in a taxi. He had thought everything through and was going to destroy the main character. Suddenly, he felt something strange happening to him. His driver didn't suspect anything until the man started screaming, drawing attention to himself. But as soon as the taxi driver turned around to see what had happened, Cao bit him and began tearing pieces of flesh from his face. The car skidded, and they were involved in a terrible accident right in the middle of the city. Meanwhile, the main character couldn't stop thinking about his wife and what had happened. It hurt him to realize that she was with someone else. He considered her a traitor who had fallen in love with another man only for money. The guy drank a lot and looked at their photos together. He cried and couldn't calm down. In such a terrible state, he fell asleep and slept until morning. The next morning, he felt very bad and exhausted and tired. He needed some fresh air, so he decided to go out onto the balcony. But as soon as he got out of bed, he felt terrible pain all over his body. However, he noticed some very strange sounds coming from the neighboring balcony. There was a girl with a covered face. She asked him to save her and was looking for shelter. He was so frightened that he fell to the ground and couldn't understand anything. He witnessed her own husband attack her and start cutting her body into pieces, and everything around her was covered in blood. The guy tried to call the police to stop the attacker and try to save her life. But the line was busy, so he decided to try all the other numbers he knew. But even that didn't help, because no one answered and he couldn't get through to anyone. Suddenly, he heard the voices of other neighbors who were gathering their belongings and trying to leave the house. He rushed over to them because he wanted to ask for help and figure out what was really going on. People were talking about zombies and the apocalypse that had come upon the world, so they wanted to leave the city and find a safe place for themselves. The main character couldn't believe what was happening and what it really was. He had to return to his apartment, and closing the door behind him, he realized what was really happening to the people he had seen. Now he understood that they were turning into zombies and that it wasn't actually the flu, but a much more terrifying infection. At that moment, he heard the terrible screams of the crowd on the street and saw with his own eyes the horror that was taking place. After what he saw, Wang tried to pull himself together, but he was convinced that what he saw was just an illusion. There were many different thoughts in his head, but it was clear that he needed to pull himself together and calm down. The boy couldn't feel his legs when suddenly he heard a terrible scream on the street. The voice was very familiar, and he quickly realized that it was his neighbors, whom he had just seen. Wang saw with his own eyes how they died and how a huge crowd of hungry zombies tore them to pieces. Now he began to feel very nervous. It was very dangerous in his apartment, because at any moment strangers could break in and kill him. In order to find out the extent of the disaster, he turned on the news, but even now, the news was old. Suddenly, there was another strange sound. This time it was soldiers and helicopters flying over the city. The hero tried to signal them, but no one noticed him, and the planes just flew past his house. The news reported that martial law had been imposed, and that the virus was spreading at an incredible rate. Wang began to panic. He didn't know what to do. None of his contacts were answering his calls. The boy tried to pull himself together, calm down, and start thinking. In order to signal for help and save himself, he was going to use a white sheet, which would attract attention. He also gathered all the pens and pencils he could find in his house. In addition, he was going to use paint, and in huge letters he managed to send a signal for help. He also planned to use the pot to attract attention, and now he just had to wait for the new helicopters to arrive. The events moved to the police station. The police and military were unable to contain the epidemic and stop the spread of the virus. The news was again disappointing, as many police officers had died in the fight against the zombies. Even the chief felt very ill because he had been bitten, and the color of his face was beginning to change. Suddenly, he began to speak incoherently and fell headfirst onto the table. A few seconds later, he also turned into a horrible mutant and tried to kill his assistant. She tried to resist, but she had very little chance of surviving. Meanwhile, Wang continued to wait for rescue, but even his large sign did not work. It was very quiet around him because his TV had stopped working. The lights were turned off in the city, and he understood that after that, the water could also be turned off, so he needed to stock up on food. He managed to collect only half a bucket of water, which would only last a few days. After that, he would simply die. At night, he heard terrible sounds coming from the street, and it was driving him crazy. But amid the growling, he heard the voices of living people begging for help. They were his neighbors, who couldn't take it anymore and decided to commit suicide. A man he knew well jumped out of the window and died from the fall. The main character thought about doing the same and was already preparing to jump. But at the last moment, he changed his mind because he didn't want to die so easily and was afraid of death. Suddenly, a notification came to his phone, and he rushed to check what it was. It was a message from his mother, who was very worried about him and was staying in a shelter where it was safe. Now that his mother was alive, he couldn't let her die and had to find her at any cost. Several days had passed since the beginning of the terrible epidemic, but he still hadn't been able to send the message. All this time he had to spend in his apartment without electricity and water. Wang managed to gather all the necessary things for consumption and what he might need on the street. He used a survival guide and was able to make a rope for himself. At that moment, he remembered his neighbors who had committed suicide, so their apartment was empty. The main character was going to take advantage of this and try to find food and other supplies. Therefore, he began to move towards their apartment. But due to his excitement, he fell and almost fell down. A woman noticed him and he asked her for help, but she just walked away without paying any attention to him. Nevertheless, he managed to gather his strength and get into someone else's apartment. He tried to examine the jackets and find a way to get out of it. But there were many more zombies in the hallway than on the street, so he also had to move through the balcony. He was lucky because his neighbors had a lot of clothes that could be used as rope. After searching, he managed to get to his house and was going to sort through everything he had found. He managed to make a long rope out of the clothes, which he was going to use to escape and search for his mother in his house. Now he needed to find food, and he was going to go to his neighbor's house again. There were many valuable things there that could be used to stop bleeding. He managed to find medicine and other medical supplies. So the hero was satisfied and was able to carry 2 full bags of supplies out of the apartment. Suddenly, he smelled a very strong odor of gas. He realized that it was coming from the apartment where the man had jumped out and committed suicide. He tried to warn the woman about the strong smell of gas, but she did not listen to him and just stared at his face. Suddenly, she took out a lighter, and then he realized what she really wanted to do. It became clear that she was going to blow herself and her house up. And now, the main character was in mortal danger. When she lit the lighter, there was a loud explosion that completely destroyed her apartment. The guy fell to the ground, covering his head with his hands, but he couldn't stop the fire. So he had to quickly gather his things and leave his own house because soon the flames would take over everything. Slowly, he began to descend, watching the flames spread throughout the building. Suddenly, his apartment also began to burn, and there was an explosion even louder than the previous one. As a result, he began to fall. However, he was very lucky because the rope got caught on the balcony and slowed him down. Wang fell painfully to the ground, but he did not suffer any serious injuries. However, there was something else. something much more dangerous. Because at that moment, he fell right on top of the zombie, which was now lying beneath him. The boy tried to run away, because now he was risking his own life. But his sheets were tangled in the dead bodies of the monsters. Therefore, this prevented him from escaping. He covered his face with his hands in fear, but nothing happened. The mutant did not attack him, but simply lay on the ground. But Wong quickly realized that he had killed it with his fall, so now the zombie was no longer a threat to him. He needed to find a knife to free himself when suddenly, he heard the voice of a living person. It was a man who was trying to escape from the crowd of zombies and was calling for help. But now it was too late. The hero did not have time to save him, and the crowd of dead people surrounded him and began to devour him alive. His legs hurt so much that he could not stand, but he had to endure it for the sake of salvation. While the zombies weren't paying attention to him, it was his chance to escape, which he was going to take advantage of. But as soon as he started running, he tripped over one of the mutants standing in his way. Wong was lucky again. At the last moment, he managed to jump out of the way and stay alive. Now he tried to run away, but all the mutants started chasing him. After a few minutes, he finally managed to break away from them and hide. He understood that he needed to be more careful and check the path ahead of him. Right in front of him was a market, and the smell was so terrible that there were no zombies or living people nearby. All the food was spoiled and rotten, but he managed to find a very old and dangerous knife. So he decided to take it with him so that he could defend himself if necessary. But as soon as he left the market, a new danger appeared on his path. In front of him was a huge army of mutants who surrounded the poor people and tore them to pieces. They immediately noticed him and were about to start chasing him. The main character tried to hide, but suddenly almost fell into the jaws of a hungry dog. But he was lucky because the dog was held back by a chain, which prevented it from biting him. The mutants did not pay attention to the dog's barking, and the pursuit continued. In addition, they also saw the poor dog, which they scared very much. And they ate it! Wong tried to confuse the mutants, so he moved through the narrow alleys of the city. He realized that the mutants were not very agile and could not turn around, but there was a high wall in front of him. The boy could not climb over it, and the door there was closed, so he tried to call for help. Now he began to say goodbye to life and was ready to kill himself because he believed that it would ease his suffering. But at the last moment, he stopped again. He didn't have the courage to kill himself. Suddenly, a miracle happened because the door to the house opened. A stranger appeared before him, but he frightened the main character so much that he was ready to stab him with his own knife in order to protect himself. It was a woman who led him inside and closed the door so that the mutants couldn't get in. But she couldn't do it because they started selling out. Her husband arrived just in time to save her. He managed to close the door and stop the mutants from getting inside. The boy was so frightened that he couldn't get up and believe what had happened to him. People tried to calm him down and wanted to take him to their apartment, which was on the second floor. A few minutes later, they told him that they also had a son who had gone out to look for supplies and had not returned. They saw that the boy was injured and wanted to help him. But it was only a small cut, so everything was fine. The people offered him food and help because they had plenty of supplies. They had also learned how to obtain drinking water, which they stored in bottles in a special room. In addition, they had a lot of concerts that they had saved in case of war. But the main character was hungry, so they decided to feed him. Cool! The front door opened and their son came home. He didn't want the main character to stay in their house because there weren't enough supplies for everyone. The boy, who overheard their conversation, was going to leave and not stay. But he knew that it was getting dark outside and there were a lot of evil mutants there, so it was very dangerous. And just as he was about to leave, they stopped him because they understood that it was indeed very dangerous there. The boy thanked them for allowing him to stay for one night. His mother prepared dinner and the boy wanted to help. He had special multivitamins, which he decided to share. At a time when they couldn't eat properly, vitamins could be very useful. It was known that the situation could not be resolved and it was out of control. The government did not think about ordinary people because it was possible to use the entire army to stop this hell. Many days had passed since the beginning of the epidemic, but the military had not yet appeared in their city. The man knew that the government was solving its own problems and that the only way to save themselves was to join the rebels. All they could do now was run away, but if they joined the rebels, they would get weapons and shelter. But to do that, they would need to be physically fit and pass many tests. Suddenly, his parents entered the room. It was time to sleep, so they were going to show Wong his bed. And their son promised to show him a safe way out the next day. In bed, he heard zombies outside surrounding the house. They calmed down when they couldn't find any living people. Soon, the military would take control of the situation, but no one knew how long it would take. In fact, it was a lie that his son had made up to reassure his parents. Wong couldn't believe his ears. He was very disappointed, so he left his home and risked his life just to find his mother and try to save her. The news was not comforting, and he had no strength left. The next morning, he was about to leave the house of the kind people who had given him a towel and some magazines. They were necessary for him to make new protection for himself. The man began to show him a safe way, which was to walk along the fire exits. In front of them was a fence with a wide hole that he could crawl through. Just in case, he gave Wang a knife so that he could protect himself. The main character thanked him for his kindness and decided to move on. He also had a small ladder that he could use to climb back up whenever he wanted. Lee helped him climb down and decided to inspect the house to see if it was safe. He managed to distract all the mutants and give the boy a chance to leave the house. They all ran after him. This gave him the opportunity to escape and avoid the mutants, so he immediately took advantage of it. Once on the ground, the boy began to run, trying to reach the fence before the mutants heard him. First, he threw his bag over to the other side. Then he tried to squeeze through the narrow opening himself. Suddenly, the mutants began to approach him and almost grabbed his clothes. They tore his clothes, but did not manage to injure or bite him. Now Wang tried with all his might to escape, and he was very lucky on his way. He found a bicycle, but it turned out to be locked. Wang moved along a wide city street, but there were so many mutants there that he almost died again. He had to hide under a car, but even there were zombies. He had no other choice, so he had to try to climb a tall crane. He realized that he had no way to get down because the mutants were starting to surround him. At that moment, he had already said goodbye to life because he thought he would not be able to save himself. He found himself at the very top and could not even believe that he had managed to climb up there so quickly. From the height, he could see the whole city. However, the mutants were not going to leave him alone and tried to climb onto the crane. However, there were so many of them that the metal frame could not withstand the weight and everything fell onto the neighboring building. He hit the concrete hard, but did not suffer any serious injuries. His whole body was covered in bruises and scratches. But when he tried to move, he realized there was a knife near his neck. Wang raised his hands, thinking that his end had come and that he was about to be brutally killed. As it turned out, it was a soldier named Yu Shun. The hero thought that the man was trying to save him, but that was not the case. He was on a dangerous mission, escorting politicians, but during the flight, he was left behind. He was the only one who managed to stay alive. He had to sit on the roof of the house for several days, and his unit had no supplies or resources. The weather changed dramatically and it started to burn, so they decided to go inside the house. The soldier had a leg injury, so the main character helped him walk and move around. They didn't know what danger awaited them at home, so they tried to check all the rooms on their way. The boy was about to open the door and look inside. However, at the last moment, the soldier tried to stop him. Inside was an unknown man with a weapon. In addition, there were many other people there who were also hiding and were very surprised to see a live police officer. They allowed them to come inside where they had plenty of water supplies. People tried to come up with a plan, but they didn't believe that they would all be able to survive. The main character knew that when the virus entered the body, the patient needed a lot of food to provide energy, which is why all the mutants were aggressive. The virus was not transmitted through water or air. It could only be contracted through direct contact with fluids such as blood. Despite the fact that there was a lot of food, there was almost none left for the people. In addition, it was known that there were many more living people in the West because the population there had always been smaller. The main character suggested staying in his city, after which one of the men attacked him. The leader of the crowd stood up for him and tried to punish the offender. He strangled the man until he apologized. To begin with, Yushin suggested that everyone go to the closed area because it was safer there. The boy noticed that Sun Dasheng's phone was working and he needed to use it. He wanted to call his mother, but he couldn't remember her number. Sun Dasheng tried to calm him down because he just needed to wait for his phone to charge. Suddenly, Wang saw tears appear on his face. When he remembered his own mother, he burst into tears because he also didn't know if something had happened to her. He tried to call her several times, but nothing worked. The man knew about Wang's past job and that he had been fired for stealing data, and everyone knew about his affair with his secretary. But now, his boss was dead, and it could be considered his revenge. Suddenly, a police officer came in and asked the young man to have a serious conversation. They had to go to a separate room. The man showed him techniques that could be used to get rid of the mutants and try to escape. Now he knew how to get out of captivity and free himself from his surroundings. And when something happened, he would be able to react immediately. He had to keep practicing until he could withstand a large number of mutants and easily escape from them. The next morning, the man tried to apologize for his behavior, or he was released. Today, they were going to check the 18th floor, which he had mentioned earlier, because that was where valuable resources and food could be found. Through the glass doors, they could see the shadows of a huge number of mutants, so they had to move very carefully. If the zombies saw them, the chase would begin and they would find themselves surrounded. When the people entered the elevator, an unpleasant surprise awaited them inside. When the mutant almost bit the fat man, he wanted to scream, but his mouth was covered. Because of him, the people were spotted, and now the chase began. One of the mutants, who got too close, had to be killed with a knife to the head. When the fat man saw his dead body, he couldn't calm down again and started crying. The mutant attacked him, while the others tried to save his life. The men tried to find weapons, but there was nothing there except tools. In addition, there were two ways to leave the building, as there were two different routes. Route B seemed safer, as they had used it before, and it was located near the freight elevator. To keep people from talking, the policeman showed them several signals. People had to respond to them in time and remember what each one meant. He also taught them how to indicate the direction in which the enemies were located. And now, when they were ready and had found weapons for themselves, they were going to continue their dangerous journey. Suddenly, the fat man started running away from the people. They tried to stop him, but he simply slipped past them. Now he closed the door on the other side. He broke the lock so that they could not get out, and now his friends were in mortal danger from the mutants, without weapons or water. In addition, he was going to release the zombies, of which there were many on the floor. The people had no choice, and while the fat man was carrying out his plan, they tried to find a way out. But a deadly danger appeared in their path, a crowd of mutants moving straight toward them. The people did not know what to do because they had no weapons. The only solution was to try to push them back in order to close the door. In addition, the main character's knife was so small that he could not kill a mutant with it. The monster pounced on him and the hero ended up on the ground. Meanwhile, the people managed to push the mutants back and close the door, blocking it with everything they had at hand. The main character continued to resist and call for help, but at the last moment, he was saved. Sun Dasheng helped him and destroyed the monster that was trying to bite his friend. His face was covered in blood, and he could hear the main character continuing to scream. Now he couldn't take it anymore, because his screams were only attracting the attention of even more mutants. If he started screaming again, the men promised to leave him behind. When everyone was able to calm down, they continued on, exploring the house. Ahead, they saw a mutant standing in the middle of the room. Suddenly, the zombie smelled them and began to attack. Besides him, there were other monsters, so now the people were in new danger. They began to turn back and tried to lock themselves in the elevator. But it was a bad plan because the zombies could get inside and they had to hold the door with their hands. In addition, the elevator was turned off and they had to figure out a way to turn it on. If they could open the door, then they would have a chance of survival. When the main character tried to get inside, he saw that something was wrong with his friends. Suddenly, they had turned into horrible mutants. Now the danger was inside, and while the others tried to open the door, the zombies were killing people. Wong thought that now he would definitely die, because they couldn't open the door. Suddenly everything worked out, and he tried with all his might to get downstairs to save his own life. The zombies tried to grab him, but at the last moment he had to dodge, but the mutant followed him. Wong tried to push him away and injure him. Suddenly they heard a rumbling sound. Due to the enormous overload, the elevator began to fall, and the people inside risked dying. The elevator hit the ground, but they were lucky to survive. Despite the fact that the zombie had lost part of its body, it remained alive and was now trying to kill them. However, the men managed to stop it and everyone was safe and sound. They were very lucky because the elevator had emergency brakes that activated at that moment and were able to soften the fall. Now they were on the 10th floor, and they needed to get out of the elevator as quickly as possible. Wong carefully opened the door to check what was inside, but it was dangerous to move forward because there were many mutants and dead bodies in the corridor. They had to sit there for an hour, and after that time, the main character felt very bad. But fortunately, the policeman had a new idea. They found fire hoses that they could use to try to climb down a few floors. It was their only way out, otherwise they would not be able to get through. While the others held the rope, the man began to slowly descend. On the 6th floor, he broke the glass and was now able to get inside. Then the girls began to descend. Now it was the main character's turn, but due to severe fatigue, he could not do it quickly enough. Yushen was the last one and managed to do it faster, even with an injured leg. Next, they decided to go down the stairs because no one had the strength to move along the rope. The policeman went first again, but he saw many mutants below. There were also many zombies above, but they didn't seem to notice them. It was very risky, so they had to somehow attract the mutants' attention. Suddenly, a drop of blood fell into the mouth of one of the men. Everyone began to prepare for the worst and lined up in a row. The main character noticed this, but no one else knew anything. The people got ready and, at Yushun's command, were about to run. He threw a knife so that the zombies would pay attention to the sound. And when they started to rise, the people ran away. They tried to go down as low as possible, but on the 2nd floor they realized they had to go back. The thing was, there were also a lot of mutants there who started running straight at them. They had to break down the door and lock themselves in one of the rooms. Suddenly, their friend turned into a zombie because of the blood in his mouth. Now he also began to attack people and wanted to tear them to pieces. They had to defend themselves and try to kill him as quickly as possible. Without hesitation, the policemen did it to stop him. They had to leave because it was very dangerous there. There was a large parking lot below, but there were a lot of zombies there, and they would die before they could reach the car. They had to try to distract the zombies, but to do that, they had to turn on the alarm. The main character still had his phone, but it was turned off, so it was possible to use it. But he realized that his dead friend's phone was a phone. Unfortunately, it didn't work either. So the men came up with another plan and took a desperate step to save themselves. They changed their clothes so as not to be infected by their dead father's blood and began to cut up his body. The women were terrified and couldn't bear to watch what was happening. Yushin began to remove his internal organs. After that, the women smeared him with the blood of the dead mutant. They began to lower him down and promised to pull him back up if nothing worked. Wang found himself on the ground, surrounded by a crowd of zombies. He tried to behave as calmly as possible so as not to attract attention, but he failed because the mutants noticed him and now he had to turn back. But he ran in a completely different direction and all the mutants rushed after him. The boy moved toward the car and tried to turn on the alarm. He didn't succeed the first time, so he had to change direction. Suddenly, he saw a car moving in his direction and thought it was his friends. But they didn't stop and just drove on. At that moment, he was very afraid for his life. He couldn't believe that they could leave him so easily. After he got out, the soldier told him about a special quarantine zone that had been set up for civilians. This was the only chance for him to save himself and get to safety. The boy watched the car drive away from him, and now he had completely lost hope. He didn't even notice when the mutants began to approach him, and one of them bit him. However, he managed to stay alive and unharmed again. He had to run away, but he couldn't believe that people could do this to him. He moved as fast as he could, trying to get away from his pursuers. However, he stumbled and fell to the ground at the last moment. He tried to get up as quickly as he could, but he saw that the mutants had surrounded him and there was nowhere to run. But now he was not going to give up because he had to find a solution at any cost. He was lucky to find a car and lock himself inside. The guy hoped that it would work and he would be able to start it. He tried several times, and finally, he succeeded. Now he had his own transportation and could get to the quarantine zone on his own. But there were many mutants in his way, and his car stopped. His seatbelt got caught on his clothes, so he had to take off his pants to free himself. Now he was back on the street and trying to escape. He was happy because he saw that he was getting away from his pursuers. But the hero did not notice that food was falling out of his briefcase. He lost everything he had, leaving him defenseless without food or water. The boy tried to hide and found himself on a glass surface, which was a safe place. But the fragile glass could not withstand his weight, and he began to fall. The boy landed right on the ground and felt intense pain. In addition, he understood that now the mutants had definitely started chasing him and would soon find and tear him to pieces. He tried to hide and move in the opposite direction, but he knew that the mutant had spotted him. They started chasing him again, but soon the boy would be completely exhausted. He tried to find a safe place where he could hide and try to regain his strength. And that place turned out to be a metal trash can, which could serve as a reliable hiding place. He got inside and listened to every sound. The boy prayed that he would not be noticed. The mutants who were chasing him simply ran past and did not stop. However, the smell inside was unbearable, so after waiting for a while, he was forced to leave his hiding place. He managed to find a warehouse with a living girl inside. She did not expect to see a living person in the city at all. It was her hiding place. Terrified, she started screaming and tried to call for help. A policewoman immediately came to her voice, unable to understand what had actually happened. But at that moment, she saw the main character, who was naked and frightened. She began to beat him, and many other people came running at the noise and joined her. They tied him up, but then decided to let him go because he did not look like a pervert or a criminal. Besides, they could not trust him and allow him to stay with them because those times were very dangerous and required caution. People had no food left, so they were going to go out to find food. People tried to come up with a new plan and smoked all the time, but they didn't even realize that it could harm them, because zombies had a very good sense of smell and reacted immediately to cigarette smoke. That night, people were born to abandon their shelter and just fall asleep. One of the survivors approached the main character. His name was Qian Jin, and he wanted to know the location of the quarantine zone. He said that they were currently in a police station, and that there used to be many more of them. He began to tell the main character about all the people, then released him and unlocked his handcuffs. They were about to escape when suddenly the mutants began to approach them and forced them to do so. A guard was standing on duty, but he didn't even have time to do anything before the zombies tore him to pieces. The man began to scream and everyone else heard his voice. Now they realized that the zombies were approaching them. Qianjin tried to push himself away so that he would not become infected. The main character was very frightened. He could not believe that the mutants could get inside and find people. He tried to resist, but he had to fight one of the zombies. The monster tried to bite him, and out of fear, he started screaming. At the last moment, he managed to gather his strength and kill the mutant that was approaching him. Other people and a policewoman witnessed this. They started screaming in fear because they couldn't believe that the main character, who at first seemed so weak, was capable of this. But that wasn't the end, because other mutants also began to approach. They had to run away as fast as possible because soon they would be in mortal danger. Outside the window, on the street, there was a police car, and if they could get to it, they could drive away and have a chance to stay alive. So they tried to leave the house one by one. But as soon as they were on the street, they saw a real army of mutants approaching them. Wong tried to hold them back with everything he could find. He managed to do it, and now they had to run to the car. One of the people who helped him and left last was caught by the mutants. Now Wong was faced with a difficult choice because he remembered how cruelly his friends had treated him, so he didn't want to do the same. He tried to call for help, but no one wanted to get out of the car and risk their own lives. But it was too late. The man was dead, and Wong did not manage to save him. Now, he tried to catch up with them and jumped right into the window. Sitting in the car, he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, because a person had died right before his eyes, and he had done nothing to help. Now they were driving to the policewoman's house, which was not far away, so she was going to turn off the road. There was plenty of water and food in her house, and in a few minutes, they were able to arrive. But when she arrived, she saw that nothing was left of her house. It had burned to the ground. Her parents, who were inside, were now dead, and the entire building had burned to the ground. Suddenly, a man in a truck arrived and warned them that mutants were approaching. He was a firefighter, but he knew that there was no one left alive in the building, so there was no point in putting out the fire. They tried to calm Sun Chen Chen down, but she did not respond. They could not stay there any longer, so they returned to the car. The firefighters had been in the car since the outbreak of the virus, and everyone had died except for one. He tried to help those who were signaling for rescue. Now, the man was going to the quarantine zone because it was safe there. In order to survive the night, they needed to find a shelter, but after the fire, there was nowhere else for people to go. However, Sun Chen Chen managed to remember a place where it was safe. There was even water and a shower there. It had its own gas system and was located in the northern part of the city. So the firefighter agreed to help them and wanted her to show him the way. The hero thought about it. He knew that the mutants reacted to fire and jumped into it as soon as they saw it. They were about to leave, but on their way they encountered many dangerous mutants. The firefighter had a helmet and an axe, and he killed everyone he met on his way. Finally, they found themselves in a safe place. It seemed that everything was clean inside and there were no mutants, but people had to be very careful anyway. They had to close all the windows so that the zombies wouldn't see them. They decided to put their belongings in the corner of the room so that they could grab them quickly in case they had to flee. Just in case, they agreed to use only 2 stalls to save water. Sun Chin Qian couldn't calm down and come to terms with the fact that she had lost her parents and her home. The boy was in the shower for too long, so when it was the other boy's turn, they started arguing. The boys almost got into a fight, neither of them willing to back down. So the firefighter intervened and decided who would have the right to wash first. The main character was very tired and wanted to sleep, but all the best places in the house were taken. The last thing he wanted was to sleep on the floor. The next day, they continued walking down the deserted street. There were more and more zombies, so the road was very dangerous. When people appeared on the street, it became clear that they were armed, so it was risky to stop. The main character witnessed a fierce battle. He tried to tell the old man that he had to hit the mutants in the head, because that was the only way to stop them. The boy told the man about the mutants and from which side they attacked him. Now he had a better chance of winning. Blood could not be allowed to get into his eyes and mouth, because then he would also become infected. But it seemed that the man knew this when he killed all the mutants and then introduced himself. It was Li Hongxing, who was the guard of the local cemetery. In the past, he was a soldier and participated in many wars, as can be seen from his paintings and photos. In fact, he was blind because he lost his sight in the war. Li Hongxing had lived like this for many years, so he was already used to it and felt normal. However, the zombies were approaching them. The people wanted to leave, but the main character could not abandon the old man. He wanted to try to help him. If death was inevitable, then it should be dignified, he believed. He tried to persuade the old man to go with them, but to no avail. But the old man did not want to leave his own home. Military service had taught him true human virtues, and he was not afraid of death. He remembered well the day when he almost died and lost his sight. He left his sick father at home with no one to take care of him. After returning, he supported and cared for him until his death. But now, he was left alone, and everything in this house reminded him of his father and felt familiar. Meanwhile, the zombies were getting closer and closer. Their car overturned and the men tried to fix it. But there was very little time. The zombies were approaching, and Wong had to fight them off with his own briefcase. He had no other choice, so he asked the old man for help. The old man silently went out into the street and prepared himself. He took out his sword and prepared to kill anyone who approached him. Li Hongxing tried to buy some time for the people and give them a chance to get as far away from the city as possible. Meanwhile, outside the police station, there were still a lot of mutants. They couldn't contact the people who were still inside the building and couldn't leave. They had a fire ladder, so they could try to reach the window. But before they started, they decided to wait until evening so that the mutants would calm down. They stopped right in front of the house and sat quietly in the truck. The most crucial moment of their plan had arrived, and after making sure that everything was clear, they were about to go out into the street. But when the ladder was raised, it made a lot of noise, so it could attract the attention of the zombies. Therefore, they first decided to try to turn on the alarms on the distant cars, and only then move on to the main part of the plan. The main character went to the cars, and after a few seconds, the alarms went off. And when everything was ready, he returned to the people. It worked, and when the mutants were distracted, the people were able to get inside the house. But still, they were able to attract the attention of those who were closest. The monsters began to approach, but the firefighter killed them one by one. He couldn't hold out for long, so the people had to hurry. They managed to reach the ladder, and the old man tried to kill them with his own sword. He couldn't see anything, so he almost fell from a great height. But the hero managed to grab him and saved his life. Li Hongxing felt very uncomfortable in an unfamiliar place, so he couldn't get his bearings. There were so many mutants that soon they would kill the man and be able to break through. Therefore, Wang returned to help him and save the man's life. Only after that did he also begin to climb inside the house. When they were inside, they closed the windows and hid. They could only hope that the mutants would not storm the house. But they were wrong. The zombies tried to get inside through the front door. They were everywhere and managed to surround them. Now Wang's theory was confirmed. He had long suspected that zombies only attacked the target they saw and heard. So now, they could be safe because they were out of sight. They just needed to be careful and not be seen. A little more, and they would all have been dead. But when they got inside, they noticed that there was no one there except for 2 police officers. All their friends were dead, and those who managed to stay were sent on special missions to eliminate the threat. Now, they couldn't go back because there were zombies on the roof, at the doors, and at the windows. In addition, the police officers had no weapons or ammunition. The only thing they had was a small storeroom with unique equipment and a couple of confiscated pistols. It was better than nothing, but it was too late because there were too many zombies in the hallway. Now, they tried to come up with a new plan because the situation seemed very difficult. However, there were no walls between the rooms, which meant that it would not be difficult to break through them. So they made a narrow passage for themselves and were able to get into the storage room with supplies. Suddenly, the girl walking behind them started screaming and begging for help. Something started pulling her back, so Wang had to hold on to her. She began to fall to the lower floor, and Wang realized that he did not have the strength to hold her. He called out to the others, but he knew that he himself was in danger of falling. Just then, the mutants began to attack him and tried to bite his legs. He was saved, but he almost died. He also helped her get out, and the girl thanked him for saving her. Finally, they managed to reach their destination. It was a spacious room with many shelves filled with various items and food. The only weapon left was a rubber baton, so he decided to take it. But the old man suggested that he take a pitchfork, as he thought it would suit him best. In addition, there were many useful tools, including some that could be used to unlock doors. Now they had all the necessary equipment, body armor, and boots, and it was time to think about returning. The main character wanted Stry to teach him military tactics and tell him how they could get out of the encirclement. It was obvious that zombies were not intelligent, and if people acted together, they could win. The police knew how to stop the uprising. To do this, they had to follow certain instructions and do everything at the same time. The men would have to protect each other and cover themselves from all sides. And now that they had a new tactic, they prepared to go out into the street and be ready for battle. In the corridor, they encountered the first mutant, and he immediately rushed at them. The police officer was so frightened that he fell to the ground, risking his life. The old man saved his life again and helped him up. Now, they gathered themselves and tried again, because they had to stop the terrible threat somehow. The old man tried to do everything he could. There were too many mutants, and the people could not withstand the onslaught, so they decided to retreat. At the same time, they tried to do everything possible to keep the monsters away from them and prevent them from biting them. The main character fought with them, and now his fear was almost gone. They tried to retreat slowly, maintaining their formation and not panicking. The people were only alive because they helped each other. One of the policemen thought he had been bitten, but the old man saved him by cutting off the monster's head at the last moment. The door was locked, and the firefighter wanted to break it down, but the boy stopped him. The mutants began to approach, and Qianjin tried to open the door with a set of tools. However, the policeman was wounded. The head, separated from the zombie's body, could bite, and very hard. It was obvious that it was impossible to help him and that the unfortunate man had to be killed before he himself turned into a mutant. He was human now, but after a while, he would turn into a zombie and attack them. But now, they managed to get inside and people tried to block the door. They were very nervous, but after a while, the zombies retreated and calmed down. Now they argued because they didn't know what to do with the wounded man. But none of them had the right to do so, so the man had to choose for himself what fate awaited him. In fact, he did not want to die, but he knew that he had behaved like a coward, and he did not want to be killed by them. He asked them to leave him there, but they simply had no other choice. Suddenly, they noticed the ventilation system that connected all the rooms in the house. The wounded man began to feel unwell. He felt that his transformation had begun. He tried to resist, but he understood that death was too close. Still, he wanted to die like a normal person, so he broke the window. The man shouted to everyone, telling them about himself while he could still speak. Hearing him, the mutants began to run towards the house. They tried to reach him, so they abandoned the ladder and the car. The main character understood that the guy was doing this for them, and so they had a chance to be saved. They had to run away, so trying not to make any noise, they left the house. Now they were inside and tried to slowly lower the ladder. The man drove back slowly, but did not notice that there were zombies there too. They had to run away again because they had made too much noise. In addition, a new problem arose. There was too little gasoline, and without electricity, which was unavailable throughout the city, they would not be able to refuel. However, there should have been generators at gas stations. They drove up to the gas station and did not even suspect that they were being watched the whole time. The angry man was ready to kill them because he hated everyone who came near him. He was obsessed and believed that everyone wanted his money, so he would not let them go for anything in the world. Meanwhile, Lee's parents were gradually running out of food at home. Now, this became a problem for them. Lee's father had to contact the military, but they couldn't pick him up. They had to find a way to get to the airport themselves. That was the only condition under which they could be picked up. But it was very dangerous to go there, and besides, Yang Jin's niece was with them. They offered her to stay at home, but they would never return. Their father was very influential, so this decision was only for people like him. He wanted the whole family to leave, and no one to stay here in this dangerous place. The family began to pack their belongings, and the father prepared his weapons. He understood that relations with his colleagues were only a matter of time. The girl did not want to leave her home, but she understood that it was necessary. Now there was no time left, and they had to go. Special vehicles that could withstand even bullets were prepared for the journey. With their help, it was easy to crush the mutants. Even a large number of zombies posed no threat to them. But despite this, the driver tried to avoid them because he was always cautious. But when there were more mutants, he simply had no other choice. Ahead was the most dangerous part of the road because it was very dark and he could hardly see anything. There were many dead bodies under the wheels of the car. He did not have time to avoid them, so his car overturned. The noise attracted the attention of the zombies that were nearby. People tried to leave the car, but realized that the mutants were approaching them. In order to hold them back, he had to open fire, not even expecting that the sound of gunshots would attract other zombies. The man was going to distract the mutants to give his parents a chance to escape. They were worried about him, but the man assured them that he could take care of himself. He would soon run out of ammunition, so he had to do everything possible to get their attention. So he started screaming. All the mutants ran in his direction, and now his parents had the opportunity to leave and hide in a safe place. They helped Yang Jin get out of the car, but couldn't help the security guard. There was no need to worry, because they considered him a master of his craft and knew he would definitely return. Meanwhile, the heroes at the gas station used the same tactic and turned on the alarm on one of the cars. They were lucky because the gas station had a backup generator that they could use. But as soon as they started it, it would make noise and turn on the lights. Before starting it, they had to turn off all the lights. They were going to take all the supplies and leave the gas station immediately. But when they looked around the room, they realized that someone had beaten them to it, and all the shelves were empty. In addition, strange sounds and noises could be heard from the second floor. So they decided to check what it was really. After carefully inspecting the second floor, they saw a zombie in the closet and killed it before the monster could bite anyone. In addition, there was a bag of money. They were so preoccupied with the money that they did not even notice an unknown person sneaking up behind them. The main character realized that something was wrong and saw the unknown person holding a knife in his hands and preparing to attack. But at the last moment, Li Hongxing managed to stop the attacker and save the boy's life. They grabbed him and tried to find out who he was and how he got there. As it turned out, he was the manager of the gas station who was guarding his money. In addition, he had gone mad because he kept talking about ghosts who wanted to rob him. When the police examined the dead woman's body, they saw marks on her neck indicating that she had been strangled. It seemed that the manager had killed her, and she was his employee because she was wearing a work uniform. The man simply raped and killed her, but when she turned into a zombie, he locked her in a closet with his money. He denied his guilt, but it was clear that they were dealing with a real murderer. Therefore, the policeman beat him. This happened very often because he had seen this many times before. However, Wang was fixated on something completely different because the girl turned into a mutant even without being bitten. Before leaving, it was necessary to distract the zombies, and the hero suggested blowing everything up. However, there was a threat that they could also get hurt and not have time to get out of here. Also, it was necessary to decide what to do with the criminal. They wanted to leave him here to die, but decided to take him to the quarantine zone, where he would be severely punished. After a while, everything was ready to start the generator. Electricity appeared, and people tried to fill up as much fuel as possible and take everything else with them. But it was too late, because the mutants started to approach them. The main character and Li Hongxing tried to stop them. The guy showed him the direction where to hit. After that, what everyone was so afraid of happened. A light appeared. They wanted to tear off the gas station, but the criminal got out of the car and didn't let them do it. Wang wanted to risk his own life to stop him, but now it was too late. A large number of mutants ran after him and started biting. In order for everything to explode, they prepared Molotov cocktails. They had to throw them near the side wall and just wait for the flames to spread throughout the room. Therefore, the firefighter came out of the shelter and did it. A big fire started, which all the zombies were paying attention to. However, Wang understood that the gas station would not explode. But they could not delay because they had to leave. Wang was wrong because as soon as they left, a strong explosion sounded. All the mutants who were in its epicenter were destroyed and started to burn. In addition, it was so strong that a strong blast wave threw the boy many meters away. Meanwhile, Yang Jin's family heard about a strong explosion. But who caused it? Perhaps the fire could attract attention, and then they could be saved. But the father could not delay any longer. He wanted to connect the computer and try to contact the government in order to change his own coordinates. Meanwhile, so many mutants had come to the explosion that they simply couldn't pass and were going to stay in the store. It was a grocery store that was located on a nearby street, and now they were trying to get into it. It was very dark inside, and in order to check if it was safe, Li Hongxing patted it. There were several mutants inside, which he easily dealt with. There was also a group of mutants outside, so they would have to stay here all night. There was no food left in the store because everything had spoiled and the vegetables had simply rotted. Apart from the blood and corpses of several mutants, they had nothing else. The girl wanted to clean up inside, and she prepared special gloves for this. They started taking out the dead bodies and treated the entire room with chemicals to kill the virus. Now the store became very clean. They also closed all the windows and doors so that the mutants could not notice them. The store became much cleaner. In addition, they made a special area for the toilet. During the cleaning, they managed to find products that did not spoil. These were canned goods, peanut butter, sugar, fruits and vegetables that had rotted could be saved. Just cut off the rotten parts. From everything else, you could make a salad. They had water and vodka. Also, people made an improvised table for themselves, which they covered with foil. Then from flour and oil, they made dough from which noodles were to be made. A little spice, water, and vegetables. And now they had a delicious soup and could eat normally. Sun Qian was so moved that she started crying. This food was so delicious. It was as if her mother had cooked it. Also, Wang wanted to remember the memory of those who died and could not sit next to them. But the policeman did not like his words. He thought it was inappropriate in this situation. Yushun intervened in the conversation because saving people is his job. They chose this job not for their own benefit, but because they believed that human life was the highest value. Listening to them, Wang felt sad. He understood that in the future, one of his friends would definitely die. And most likely, it will be him. He had few skills. He was not as strong and brave as the fireman or Yuzhun. He still wanted to find his mother and girlfriend, and he would not be able to do it alone. The men looked at him silently. The old man broke the silence. He tried to reconcile the people. And he succeeded. Now everyone started eating delicious food together. They ate to survive. The next day, the fire was still burning, and taking this opportunity, they tried to get to the car. They managed to escape, but after a while, they stopped because they saw a signal for help. The people started arguing again because the firefighter couldn't leave them in trouble and wanted to help. But it was a risk that no one wanted to take and stop. Still, they decided to do it and left the car. It was Yang Jin's family that they were now trying to save. He and his wife were happy to see them and hoped that now they would be saved. But they were not from the government, but just ordinary people who united for the sake of survival. It was an unexpected meeting because the main character could not even think that his ex was there. In addition, she was next to her new boyfriend, Hu Hao Ran. She was very happy when she saw him and couldn't believe that he would come back for her. But he just turned around and left. The people had a car that Chen Jin could open with special tools. The family was going to pack up in order to leave as soon as possible. At the same time, the main character couldn't stop thinking about what happened between them. Suddenly, she found him and came up to thank him for saving her. But he didn't listen to her because it was too late to try to change anything. He didn't want to have anything to do with her anymore, so he drove her away. The guy dreamed of returning to her again, but now he realized that it was simply impossible. Her new boyfriend entered the room, forcing the hero to apologize to him. And when he turned to leave, Wang attacked him and struck him. He was angry and tried to hit him, but the man managed to dodge. After that, he himself hit Wang. They continued to fight. Hu Hao Ran tried to kick him, but the hero grabbed her. Hu Hao Ran resorted to a forbidden technique. He threw him to the ground and held him, not giving him the opportunity to get up. Suddenly, the hero saw the mustard on the ground that was in his bag, so he had an idea. He tried to change his position and turn around to face him. After that, he smeared his eyes and face with mustard. Also, he even bit him. Meanwhile, Chen Jin tried to fix the car and first wanted to remove the alarm. Only after that could he start opening the lock so that the mutants wouldn't hear any sounds. Next, he could try to start the engine, and for this, he needed to change the wiring. Suddenly, everyone noticed that the main character was fighting with Hu Hao Ran. People tried to stop it and pulled them in different directions. Hu Hao Ran said that Wang hit him first, and at that moment, Yang Jin supported him. Wang simply couldn't look at it, so he left again. Now, they were going to set off in 2 cars, and the man promised to show the way to the river. But the fire truck was full, so they had to split up to take 2 cars. Still, they set off. There was a very difficult and dangerous path ahead. They had to move along the riverbed because all the other roads were blocked. But they had to stop. There was a person ahead who was trying to escape from the zombies. They had no other choice. They had to save the poor guy, so the people left the car and started fighting. Wang almost died, but he always remained careful and tried not to get too close. They killed the mutants with everything they had. They managed to cope with a small group of zombies very easily. The woman who got out of the car couldn't understand why they stopped. And the man they saved asked not to leave him. He knew about a place where there were many other people waiting to be saved. Despite the fact that it was in a completely different direction, the men agreed to help because it was their principle. In addition, the girl simply overheard the family's conversation and knew that they were going to use them, because they were waiting for them at the airport. Besides, Yang Jin's life was in danger. They were not going to take her with them. Wang didn't understand why his girlfriend didn't listen to the policeman, but trusted her new boyfriend, whom she had known for not so long. But he understood that he couldn't change anything. It was unlikely that she would want to listen to him. Suddenly, one of them felt very sick. He almost lost consciousness. The others went into a narrow tunnel that led to the mine. Nearby was a house with a ladder that led to the roof. Before getting to the surface, they carefully examined the street. They had to hurry, because the mutants, who were far away, would quickly get to them. And when the people got to the surface, the zombies began to run in their direction. They hurried to try to get to the roof of the house as quickly as possible. In addition, the main character also had a hard time because he felt tired. He noticed that Jin Junji could not move. He felt very bad. In addition, the main character also understood that something incomprehensible was happening. He wanted to help, but it was too late. Jin Junji was infected. Therefore, he had to kill him so that he would not infect others. No one understood what had happened, but they saw Wang standing on the edge of the building. His heart was pounding and there was blood on his face, and he expected that very soon he would also turn into a mutant. He was preparing to jump and said goodbye to his parents, whom he had never managed to save. The firemen tried to stop him, but he knew that no one should know what had happened, because then they would leave him and not let him go with them. Still, they managed to persuade the hero to stop, and when he didn't transform either, he realized that everything was over. Now everyone knew that Jin Junji was dead. They bowed down to him. It was a really big loss for all of them. After a few minutes, Du took them to the place where his people were hiding. There were a lot of people there, and they were all happy when the professor brought help to save them. They had a big problem with food. The children were hungry, but the men could not take everyone with them. However, someone from the crowd had a school bus. He was in the parking lot, but now, due to the large number of mutants, it was impossible to get to him. In order to distract attention, it was possible to use fire, but it was very dangerous to go down. All the zombies were behind the door, so people had no way to leave the room. It was necessary to kill the zombies, but among the crowd, there was a student, as he considered zombies the next link in the evolution of humanity. He believed that mutants could not be killed, because they were at the top of the evolution. However, he had no evidence, and out of fear, he refused to go first. He believed that nature is a perfect mechanism, and when a species becomes too strong, it will be destroyed. This is exactly what happened to people. Nature was simply trying to destroy their dominant species. In any case, it was a new era, and the apocalypse was not so easy to stop. No one could believe his words, so they simply considered him a fool. But the guy did not agree with them, and did not admit that he could be wrong. On the contrary, he was convinced that he was the genius of the modern world. He tried to find supporters of his theory, but no one agreed with him. They were afraid of one thing: rain, because then all the infection would be in the air, along with the water. The only way out was to break through the wall into the next room. They didn't even suspect how dangerous it was, because the zombies had become aggressive again. Because of their pressure, the door couldn't stand it, and soon they would get to the people. They had to create a special mechanism to break through the wall faster. The zombies were approaching, so they blocked the front door with furniture and other things that were inside. After some time, they finally managed to break through the wall and a large crack formed there. Now they could finally leave the room. After that, the mutants were able to break through and began to chase people. Now, everything possible had to be done to distract them. But when the main character threw a Molotov cocktail, he missed. Immediately, the whole room caught fire, and the only escape was the window. But it was too late. Not all people would be able to escape and leave the house. The mutants were inside. They managed to leave the room, which started to burn. There were a lot of people left inside, but despite this, they had to close the door behind them. The men attacked Wang because he almost killed them all. After a while, the zombies calmed down, and now they had to come up with a new plan. If they leave now, the zombies will definitely start running after them, and there were too many of them: children, women, sick and hungry. The house started to burn, so in a panic, Wang wanted to follow the bus alone. He needed support, but no one wanted to take on such a big responsibility and risk their lives. As it turned out, Dao had his experimental machines that people could use. It was a toy car and a helicopter that he designed himself. These toys were very powerful, developed great speed, and could withstand even a person. In addition, zombies will not be able to reach the helicopter, and it can be used to deliver supplies. The guy got ready. He was going to go to the bus and try to get inside. Now he got into the car and got ready to drive. When he pressed the gas pedal, it started to move, and only then did he realize how powerful it really was. He was moving very fast and did not immediately figure out how to control it. The zombies had no chance to catch up with him. He really liked it. This thing was fantastic and very valuable. Finally, he managed to get to the bus, but everything was not so easy. He did not even notice how the mutants who were chasing him were about to tear him to pieces. However, Wang managed to dodge, and those who remained had to be killed. He understood that he would not be able to cope with them on his own. The guy tried to keep them away from him, but it did not help. Wang hoped that people would help him and could distract or kill the mutants. Suddenly, the helicopter, which had been flying nearby all the time, opened fire. He shot with nails, but it did not help. It was not possible to pierce their skulls, so Wang had no choice but to start running away. He ran as fast as he could and waited for the people to kill the mutants. The helicopter chose other tactics and now used much more powerful ammunition. It helped. He managed to cut off the mutant's head. Wang managed to break away. He managed to pick up people, but the pursuit continued. Now people started to run away, but they didn't know at all in which direction they needed to move. A fire truck collided with a bus in order to block the road and prevent the zombies from catching up with people. Now, they were left on the other side of the road without transport. They had no other choice. The only option was to try to get down from the bridge. But the zombies started approaching them again. Many people started to panic. They were afraid and couldn't bring themselves to go down. The men tried to calm them down, because all that needed to be done was to try to get to the quarantine zone. Wang tried to persuade the man to leave the bus and help, but there was not enough time. He had to take radical measures and hit him. But even that didn't help, and the man didn't want to leave the bus even more. The guy continued to beat him because he had no other choice, and there was not much time left. Li Hongxing wanted to detain the mutants because he was blind and didn't want to become a burden. The hero tried to describe the area to him and explained which side the ladder was on. Therefore, they left, and the old man stopped and was going to fight the mutants until his last breath. The nerd thought that the zombies wouldn't touch him if he started praying for them. But his theory didn't work. As soon as the zombies saw the guy, they immediately pounced and started biting him. Now he realized that he had to run away, because everything he thought about before was a lie. However, he also failed to do this. It was too late, so the mutants caught up with him and killed him. One by one, people began to descend. The firefighter was the last to go and checked that no one was left behind. He was also going to descend, but suddenly he realized that he was too late. The man didn't even notice how the zombie grabbed his leg and was going to bite him, but he was lucky to kill him and remain uninfected. Now they tried to save Li Hongxing, but he couldn't see anything and almost fell down. But when Wang saw the hand on the rescuer's body, he thought it was the end. But the man explained that it was the only way to save his own life. The dead man's hand grabbed him very tightly, so the old man was going to help him. In the past, he had worked with something like this and knew that it was necessary to break every finger and bone. Moreover, they didn't know if the leg was intact and needed to check it. When the coward heard that there was a threat, he stopped and started to back away. He didn't even think about the mutants surrounding them, so he was bitten. His leg was hurting so bad that he couldn't be saved now. He had to leave him there, and the men were going to do it. But he didn't want to stay and die, and asked them to help him escape. It wasn't possible. The poor guy started screaming. He blamed everyone for what had happened. And he just jumped down, promising to take revenge even from the next world. No one could understand his motives. Wang was very scared for his friends. He didn't know how long they could hold out, but he had to keep going and start descending. Suddenly, Qianjin managed to find transportation. Also, they could try to find electric bicycles, which were plentiful in the city. So now, they had to go in search of bicycles, while the others would guard the bridge and the children. The men left. There had to be bicycles somewhere. The guy understood that now there were a lot of them, so it would be very difficult to survive without losses. Suddenly, what everyone was so afraid of began. The mutants reacted to the water and began to rise and become aggressive because of the noise. The rain was only getting stronger, so first they needed to find shelter. All the people managed to find electric bikes, and they saw a car that was slowly rolling along the road. The men almost got under the wheels of a car, but those who were riding behind could not avoid danger. A little girl and her father were on the ground. The man tried to save his child, but the accident was very terrible. No one could believe that the car was moving, and therefore it was necessary to find the driver. The man and daughter were fine. They were very lucky, especially the child who was not injured. However, she closed her eyes and did not react at all to her father's words. He was very scared and tried to wake her up. And yet she came to her senses, everything was fine. However, the man was much less lucky. There was blood on his face. A piece of car debris got stuck in his back and he started screaming in pain. The father tried to endure the pain, but he understood that he needed help. They found shelter, so he sent his daughter to play with other people. No one understood what had happened. They did not see his injury. The man understood that this was the end. He cried and begged to protect his daughter from death. No one could believe that everything could end like this. His daughter would remain an orphan, so they promised to take care of her. In the end, he took her in his arms and said that he would go in search of her mother, who had died many years ago, but she did not want to let him go. The girl wanted him to stay with her, but it was not possible. Now she will be alone forever, without her parents. She will need to learn everything, to survive, cook, think, and fight. He also ordered her to obey the adults and do everything as they say. The man felt very bad. He understood that he would soon start to transform, so he left. They locked him in another room and heard how much pain he was in. Now he had to be killed. He was no longer human, so he did not feel pain. The girl heard her father's screams and tried to free herself. She bit the woman and was able to break free and started running to her father. The girl opened the door where her father was and froze. What she saw scared her so much that she lost consciousness. Everything was fine. The girl was just very scared because they had never seen a zombie in front of them in their lives. Qianjin wanted to know who the woman who was holding the girl was. As it turned out, it was Mengyao, who worked as a teacher at a local university. They agreed to talk later because now was not the best time for this. The policewoman remembered and understood what kind of life was now waiting for the poor girl. As a child, she was left completely alone and lost her dearest person, her grandmother. No one knew what to do next, but one thing was obvious: their strength in unity. Li Hongxing believed that they could move forward even as a group, and there was nothing wrong with saving people. The woman couldn't come to her senses for a long time. And Wang was faced with a difficult choice. He didn't know whether to continue saving people or focus on saving his own family. In addition, he didn't like being among the group of people. They considered him a weakling. In addition, they forced the hero to do all the dirty work and perform the most dangerous tasks. This annoyed him very much. Therefore, he tried to take revenge on them for their disrespect. Wang got angry when Qianjin approached him. He just wanted to talk to him. But he was stopped by another one who asked for water and got very angry because the guy didn't do it. Wang even wanted to hit him, but the man was much stronger and more experienced. Now, they started fighting each other. No one understood what was happening, so they tried to stop them. But even together, they couldn't do anything. Instead of supporting each other, they just fought. It was wrong, because now they needed to stick together. Wang was desperate, so he wanted the old man to teach him a few techniques. But his kung fu was against zombies, not for beating people. The man refused. Besides, the hero's body was too weak. The guy wanted to lie and say that it was for the zombies, not for revenge. He didn't let go of the master and again began to ask to show him a few tricks. Nevertheless, the man agreed and promised to show him a few tricks with a stick. The weapon had to be used. The movements had to be smooth and clear. The weapon had to be used for defense, not attack. Now, the teacher showed him the tricks. The next was a step, which could knock any opponent off their feet. Then, he pressed the guy to the ground and started to give. Now, it was his turn, and the guy had to demonstrate what he had mastered. He needed to bend his knees, relax his shoulders, but Wang remembered almost nothing. But he continued to practice for more than 4 hours in a row. It was enough for today, but he didn't want to stop. He needed more practice. Still, he couldn't convince the teacher, and he went to bed first. The guy continued to practice hard. He fell many times, but every time he got up. In addition, there were already many injuries on his hands. The guy was very tired and fell asleep right on the ground. He had a dream. He dreamed of a car following him and trying to hit him. And then he had nowhere to run. Suddenly, he started screaming in fear. His wife was driving with her new boyfriend. They didn't let go of him and continued to chase him. She promised to chase him forever and never leave him alone. Suddenly, the guy woke up. He was very scared because he thought it was a bad sign. Suddenly, he realized that it wasn't a dream because he heard a loud scream. It was a child crying. It was a little girl who was crying in the middle of the night because she wanted to be with her own father. She was crying, and the mutants paid attention to her screams, who began to look for the source of the noise. It was necessary to close the little girl's mouth as soon as possible and do everything to make her stop crying. But no one could calm her down. She started crying even harder. She was scared, crying, and wanted to go to her parents. The woman tried to do everything to calm her down. She realized that the girl had a high fever and needed medicine, but it was very dangerous. Besides, she could infect other people who were near her. Shengli did not forget yesterday's fight with the main character. He began to threaten him and did not want him to come closer. Suddenly, he attacked him. This was exactly what the hero expected. He showed him what he had learned, so he was able to dodge easily, and then he squeezed his neck. Wang continued to squeeze his neck, and the man was almost suffocating, so he asked him to stop. Nevertheless, the firefighter managed to intervene and forcefully take the protagonist away. When it was all over, Li Hongxing tried to give a short briefing to all the men. Before moving to the quarantine area, they needed to make a proper plan. They could not allow any deaths or injuries. Time was short, so they needed to make armor for themselves from tires. In addition, they needed medicine. All the supplies they had to be brought downstairs, close all the windows and doors, and stay indoors. Therefore, the preparation began. They tried to make a simple defense out of a box. In addition, they needed to come up with a way to distract the zombies. This could be done with a pile of empty cans that could make a lot of noise. They could fill the can with rocks and close the hole. Next, they figured out how to make armor out of cardboard, which they began to wrap around their arms and legs. Now, they began to prepare to leave the room in order to start looking for supplies. It was very dangerous outside, but they simply had no other choice. At this time, the mutants were calm, because there was no noise on the street. In front of them, they found a pharmacy, but there were a lot of mutants there who did not let them get inside. You need to distract them and try to get inside. Suddenly, they saw that someone was there, but the suspicious person quickly disappeared. The bots had to be careful because it could be a mutant, but the person looked like a living person. Still, they went to their plan and tried to distract the mutants with cans. When they got inside, they heard sounds behind the door, so there were zombies. There were 2 of them, so they decided to deal with them quickly. Wang caught one of them and waited for the man to tear off his head, and he mercilessly killed him by shoving a metal stick right into his mouth. But something happened that no one expected. The mutant did not die and tried to attack him again. They did not injure his brain, therefore the mutant did not die. In addition, The firefighter also needed help because he could not cope with him alone. They had to close his mouth so that he would not notice anything, and only after that, they were able to kill him. Now it was necessary to act as quietly as possible, but all the doors were closed. There were no zombies inside, therefore they could now move on. But when the policeman went inside, unknown persons attacked him. They grabbed him and pinned him to the ground. He couldn't move. The men tried to shout at Zhao Xin and asked him not to move. As it turned out, they were armed soldiers who were ready to kill him. The men had to give up and raise their hands. As it turned out, it was the same family they had saved, so they ordered the soldiers to stop. Among them was Hu Hao Ran, who was surprised when he saw familiar faces. The soldiers were happy when they realized that the people were familiar and that they wouldn't have to kill anyone. In addition, there was the main character's ex-wife, whom he didn't expect to see there. This meeting was very unexpected for him because he was not prepared for it. He was angry and pushed Hu Hao Ran, who was looking at him without looking up. But why did the people stay here and not fly on the plane? However, Hu Hao Ran was very surprised when he heard this question, because he knew absolutely nothing about the plane and what they were supposed to fly. His father said that they had contacted the airport that day and sent an SOS signal. They saw it start to approach them, but at the last moment an accident occurred. In the end, it exploded and attracted the attention of a large number of mutants. There were shots fired, so the people decided to move in their direction. But they didn't expect this at all. A group of zombies surrounded the military and started killing them one by one. They couldn't escape. Then the military managed to escape and save them, and now they met again in this house. Most likely, the outbreak of the disaster occurred precisely in hospitals, airplanes, and train stations. Hu Haoran was angry because no one warned him. Chen Jin knew that the guy was trying to quarrel them, so he ordered the main character not to listen to him. Perhaps one of the passengers on the plane was already infected, so everyone was doomed and also got infected. The military knew that the virus was a type of dog flu and was transmitted through the air, had an incubation period, and did not show any symptoms. Therefore, the soldier believed that everyone present was infected, but the virus developed differently in each person. Depending on the immune system, it could manifest itself in everyone at any time. This man worked as a doctor in one of the central hospitals, so he could be trusted. In addition, one of the soldiers confirmed his words, because it was he who pulled him out of the hospital and cured his wounded leg. He was injured by a grenade fragment. It was not a bite. When it all started, the military tried to save all the doctors, because they were the ones who were most needed. In addition, antibiotics did not help in the fight against the virus. They could only delay the incubation period, but not completely cure a person. The main character also had a question for the doctor, but he didn't have time. People went to the windows and saw something that scared them very much. Everyone wanted to see what was really happening. But none of them could believe that everything was really happening. In front of them was a huge wave of mutants, destroying everything in their path. They even killed each other, but did not stop. Suddenly, the mutants saw people and started running. People started running, but the military stopped them. They had to come up with a plan because they were taking a lot of risks. Maybe they didn't even notice them, because even zombies had their own instincts. All the zombies were moving in the same direction without a specific goal. Wang wanted to go to the quarantine zone, because that's where they could be safe. But that was no longer possible. The quarantine zone had long been lost because the zombies had destroyed it long ago. Wang couldn't believe it and attacked the man. But the elder confirmed his words, because they came from there and there, except for death. There was nothing else. They survived only because there were few people in their territory. There were a lot of victims and everyone they knew was dead. It was impossible to give up. Even in such difficult cases, they had to be together and support each other. It was necessary to explore areas where there was little population because it could be safe there. It was a good idea, but they had too many people. It was very dangerous to go to such an area. There were too few roads and the path was too long and dangerous. They couldn't all go there because too many people would attract attention. Zhao Xin wanted to call the other people who were hiding and go with the others. They didn't have time to gather, so they had to leave the city that was overrun by mutants immediately. The protagonist couldn't believe that his dream of finding his own family had been destroyed. He was ordered to bring the other people from the group while they prepared the car. Wang was very scared. He didn't want to leave his mother. Therefore, he decided to try to find her alone. The guy was going to leave, and only after he returned, he would bring a group of people. There were a lot of zombies on the street, so he couldn't just leave. The chief was going to take them as far away as possible to give people a chance to get out. He had a crossbow, and the man prepared to shoot from it. And when he aimed, he pulled the trigger. A shot rang out. The arrow flew right through one of the mutants. He tried to kill the zombies surrounding the car, but 2 more of them were behind it, so he waited for them to leave. Another shot and 2 more corpses, no noise, everything was quiet and peaceful. The military had a very good car, armored. The main one was going to distract the attention of the dead, and then the people had to rely only on themselves. When he started the engine, the mutants immediately paid attention to him. The main character ran to try to bring other people. He had almost reached the place where his friends were. But at the last moment he stopped, because the mutants tried to attack him, but he was fast, so he was able to dodge and avoid danger. But he could not relax because the mutants were rising, and they continued to catch up with him. In order to avoid danger again, he had to use the techniques that the teacher showed. This allowed him to break away from them again. Now, he understood that kung fu and kicks were really effective weapons. When he reached the people, he ordered everyone to follow him. But what they all feared so much happened because the little girl disappeared. Shengli wanted to leave her, but they had very little time to look for the girl. However, the professor could not afford it because they had promised her dead father to take care of them. The main character understood that time was very short, especially since he would have to look for a small child. He had no other choice, so he went in search, and if he found the girl, he would hear her voice. Suddenly, he saw a mutant who did not leave the closet. He had to fight him, because he knew that the closet had a child. After he managed to win, he opened the closet to check if she was alive. As it turned out, she was really there, scared and hungry. Now he tried to calm her down and do everything possible to make her agree to go with him. But she did not listen to him, so he had to pull her out by force. The girl grabbed him tightly, but did not want to go with him. The hero was so busy that he did not even notice how a zombie picked him up and began to bite his hand. Now, with all his might, he had to hold on and fight the mutant. In addition, he tried to protect the girl who had been sitting in the closet all the time and started crying even more. Now he himself needed help. He knew if I could get out alive. Shengli came to his cry who killed the mutants. But now he was stuck, but the girl was fine and he was able to find her. The woman tried to calm her down and asked her to never run away again. And when everything was ready and people gathered, they needed to think about how to get to the others and save themselves. But now, the zombies who managed to distract them returned again, and people were in mortal danger. Now, they had to carefully turn back without attracting attention. And they started to leave, trying not to attract attention. But they understood that they could not hide forever because sooner or later they would run out of food and water. The soldier understood that they had no other choice, so he agreed to open fire and divert attention to himself. It was necessary to calm down the people who began to panic. They did not believe that they would be able to get out. They did not obey the soldier and made a lot of noise, so he had to threaten them with a weapon. Wang began to panic because now the situation was very critical. The military assured them that they would all definitely survive, and that was an order. People have stopped. What to do next? It was impossible to make any sound. It was necessary to close the windshield and wait until the soldier would divert their attention to himself. The mutants began to surround the car, but the people hid and tried to do everything so that the mutants would not notice them. Carefully and very quietly, they tried to close the windows. Suddenly, a shot rang out, then another and another. All the mutants paid attention to this and tried to determine the source of the noise. The soldier tried to attract as many mutants to himself as possible and understood that he would not be able to get out of the environment. He smoked constantly because he knew that smoke also attracted attention. Now, a huge wave of mutants was running straight at him. Taking advantage of the opportunity, people began to flee and press the gas with all their might. And the soldier, when he realized that he was doomed, blew himself up with a grenade. Thanks to his feat, people managed to escape and leave the city. Now, they finally managed to find themselves outside the city. But outside the city, it was not calm. There was a group of bandits who robbed everyone who tried to leave the city. They considered it their duty because they robbed the rich and gave everything to the poor. People brutally killed all the people, even though they were from the government. They tried to spread the loot among the cars. They had their own transport and weapons, which they also managed to loot. Suddenly, the guy they had just killed turned into a mutant and started biting people. No one expected this, so they started beating the mutant again. But now, the guy they had bitten was doomed because they wanted to bite him. However, they killed the man without even listening. They left his dead body in the same place and drove away. Meanwhile, the hero's cars were driving along the same road. They found a suitable abandoned house for themselves in which they decided to stop. The house was luxurious and very large. All the people would definitely be able to fit there. But the door was closed, so it was impossible to open it with a key. Xianjin was going to do it with his tools, but it was the best mechanical lock, so there was very little chance of opening it. But after a while, he managed to do it, and they were able to find themselves inside the house. Now, people tried to check every room and find the valuable things that were there. Also, they cared about the security of the house and tried to close all the wreaths and doors. However, there was another problem. There was no water and light in the house because the electricity was turned off all over the city. Maybe the water was in the toilet or the boiler? They checked the refrigerator and noticed that there were several bottles of ordinary water. But this water was very expensive, and it seemed that the real rich people lived here in the past. They put all their belongings in one place so that they could quickly escape in case of danger. They also gathered all the food they had and found that they only had a few days' worth of supplies left. The main character checked his hand and made sure that he was not infected and had not been seriously injured. There was a lot of alcohol and spirits in the house, so the men could relax. Wang was very happy when he realized that he would stay alive. The doctor had his own theory. He believed that zombies were not dead at all, but in fact, they were living beings. There was a theory that turning a person into a mutant was not death at all. The virus took over human cells in less than an hour, but it didn't kill them. It just kept them under its own control. The virus was transmitted through the blood and gradually reached the brain, after which the heart stopped. Wang didn't understand anything at all, but the doctor believed that the zombies could be cured and brought back to life. Therefore, there was hope that a vaccine could be developed and humanity could be saved. At the same time, the events moved to the bandit's house. The man who came to the chief tried to bargain with him to get as many supplies as possible. He wanted to keep twice as many supplies, and when the chief didn't agree, he simply punched him in the face. The man could not understand anything, but he knew that in front of him was actually an influential person. He wanted to get twice as many supplies for the family of the infected man whom he shot on the street. Therefore, he kicked him out for this and ordered him to give up his weapons. It seemed that this was the leader of the gang, who was very angry because recently they had lost a lot of good fighters. The next morning, they prepared for a sortie and were going to explore the outskirts of the city. The wine prepared, took weapons, and were going to go hunting. The men began to search the neighboring house and prepared to fight the mutants. There was a car there and it seemed to be in working order. They gathered all the supplies they could find in the house and loaded them into the house. In addition, they continued to search the house, trying to find everything useful that was there. They carefully put all the things in boxes and sorted only the necessary ones. They managed to search all the neighboring houses, and now only one remained. It seemed that this house was very rich because there were many expensive cars there. There were a lot of valuable and expensive things in the house, but the main thing was to find food. Suddenly, the main character felt very sick and had a bad stomach ache. He needed to find a toilet. But as soon as he relaxed, he saw a mutant who rushed at him. He tried to fight it off, sitting on the toilet. First, he tried to throw the zombie to the ground, and then finish him off. The zombie fell into the bathtub, but that wasn't the end of it. The guy took the toilet lid and hit it on the head with all his might. From the strong blow, he crushed his head. A firefighter came to the sounds of the battle, who wanted to save him. The men praised him for becoming so brave and now killing zombies. But you couldn't relax. You always had to be attentive and careful. The guys continued to look around the house, and suddenly, they were able to find a secret door. The door was carefully disguised and hidden by a floor mirror. They decided to check what was in that room, but no one dared to go there. After a few minutes, they decided to go down. It seemed very quiet downstairs, and there was no one there. Inside was a room where there were objects for violence. In addition, there were photos of all the victims who were unlucky enough to be inside the room. These were photos of women who had experienced terrible torture and abuse. The people who lived in that house were real monsters. Suddenly, Wang noticed many other strange things in the room. And when he approached the child's bed, he couldn't believe his eyes. When Zhao Xin saw the boy's reaction, he wanted to know what had happened there. And now they all looked at the baby's bed and couldn't believe it. The girl and the baby were hiding in this place, but suddenly, disaster struck. The scene was so terrible that they became very angry about what was happening in the world. After that, they delivered everything they could find to their own house. Besides, they now had cars. They used the battery to charge their phones and equipment. Now Yang Jin tried to call her parents, about whom she knew almost nothing during the epidemic. No one answered, and she started crying. But when the boys tried to calm her down, they almost got into a fight again. Maybe it was the very bad signal, which was almost non-existent here. The father of the family was able to call his friends, but realized that the minister was dead. And until the government finds out the cause of death, they will no longer save people. the girl was upset because now they had to rely only on themselves and not wait for help. Today, they prepared a normal meal from the products that they could find in the houses. The professor was able to create a solar water heater, and now they could produce electricity. Also, they were going to break the furniture in order to strengthen the house. The firefighter told about the basement that was found in one of the houses. But as soon as the girl heard about it, she wanted to know where this place was. Now, her behavior became very strange and everyone noticed it. But she tried to justify herself and said that she was just very surprised. In fact, a lot of things like this happened all the time in this area. Rich people hid a lot of secrets. But when everyone was about to disperse, Li Hongqing stopped them. He wanted to hold a meeting and discuss a plan of action. He wanted to learn lessons from what happened so that in the future, he would not make the same mistakes. The main character suggested returning to his hometown where it was cold and there was plenty of food in winter. But it was too far and risky. People would never be able to walk such a long distance. The roads in the city were very bad, so they would have to change their car anyway. Cars could be placed around the perimeter to provide additional protection. The local resident knew that there was a car repair shop in this area of the city, where they could find a lot of valuable equipment. There they could try to improve their weapons and cars. Also, they could create better armor for themselves. They could use a cloth pad, and on top of that, an additional layer of leather that would protect them. However, they had a lot of people without combat training, so they had to train them to shoot and defend themselves. He started to argue with the hero because he considered his ideas absurd. But the old man tried to calm them down and reconcile them. As a soldier, he knew that it was necessary to build a reliable line of defense and protect his house from enemies. It was necessary to build several lines of defense, and on each of them there should be people. They had a lot of provisions and supplies that could not be lost. Now, they needed to come up with a plan of action and start defending themselves right now. It was already dark, and the light in their house was clearly visible, and with this, they were able to attract the attention of the bandits. Now, the enemies knew for sure. Someone was in the house, and most likely, they could be robbed and killed. In order to carefully examine everything, it was necessary to get closer to them. In addition, people did not forget about hygiene and took turns washing and brushing their teeth. They managed to find toothpaste, but there was not enough of it, so they had to save money. At the same time, Wang wanted to talk to the doctor who was working. He had a secret, but he did not know if he could tell about it. The main character complained about his own well-being, but he did not know what was really happening to him. There was mutant blood in the main character's mouth, but he was lucky not to turn into a mutant. The doctor explained this by the fact that there were simply no wounds in his mouth, so he did not get infected. The doctor was convinced that people who would survive the apocalypse had unique skills and abilities. Also, you could say that these people were unique, because every time they managed to stay alive, even in the most dangerous situations. The guy left, he was going to train again and asked the teacher to give him a couple more lessons. Meanwhile, the bandits were preparing for the attack and were going to think over a thorough plan of attack. The men who went on reconnaissance assured that people lived in the house. In addition, they had weapons, supplies, and even cars. For them, this is a real opportunity to recover, because people had penetrated their territory and stolen supplies that belonged to them. It seemed that the chief did not believe that there could be so many people in the house. He believed that there were no more than 2 people there. After talking, he dismissed the 3 men who were on duty. Now their main task is the greenhouses. The next morning, the people continued to equip the house and prepare for defense. In addition, they tried to repair cars and modernize them to be able to overcome bad roads and obstacles. Very expensive, and good cars had to be disassembled in order to take valuable spare parts from them. The women tried to make better armor for the soldiers, and the craftsmen worked on the electricity. The generator they had was too noisy, so it could not be used without proper reasons. Therefore, in order to generate electricity for themselves, they tried to install solar panels. When everything was ready, they tried on the new armor and were amazed at its high quality. Now, they were sure that nothing would prevent them from completing the task and doing everything as it should be. Therefore now, they prepared for battle and were ready to fight any number of mutants. Despite this, it was necessary to remain careful and attentive. People had a clear plan and were going to rob a local store. But they were beaten because there was nothing else there. All the shelves had long been empty. The only thing they had left was the vending machines with drinks and food. The glass was not working, so it had to be opened from the back. They found a lot of supplies in the machine, some rice and grain. After processing, it could be cooked and eaten. They also had chocolate and chips, which could be a regular food for every day. Finally, they could replenish their food supplies that had long since run out. They continued to search other stores in the city and found pieces of cheese that could still be eaten. There was also soybean oil, but it had to be consumed very carefully. But they packed up and took with them everything they could find in the house. In addition, there were a lot of paper and wet wipes that could be used to stop the bleeding and treat wounds. There were women's tights that could be used to protect their arms and legs. They were very elastic and comfortable. They could be made into a rope. In order to carry away all the loot, they had to use a cloak because they couldn't take everything. Suddenly, Chen stopped because he saw danger ahead of him. However, the others couldn't see anything ahead at all and thought he was just imagining it. The blind man also felt that they were being watched and wanted to rob them. The bandits were watching them all the time and they almost got caught. They were watching the men carefully and were waiting for the moment to attack them and take everything. Spies were everywhere. They were watching them all the time. The hostile people were everywhere and had already been able to determine where the house was and how many people were inside. But now, the people were sure that they were being watched and were ready to take the fight. Now, they were in danger and tried to regroup. Now they needed to find a car as soon as possible. But they couldn't rush because they didn't know how dangerous the enemies were and how many there were. All the men who were in the house prepared for the fight and were ready to save others. But when they started the cars, it made a noise that drew the attention of the zombies. So now, they had to fight back, but they didn't have enough strength for that. But they simply had no other choice and had to fight. The tights they had became a very good weapon because thanks to them, it was possible to stop many mutants. Just at that moment, the main character saved his friend's life. Suddenly, the cars appeared, which everyone had been waiting for so long because it was their salvation. Finally, people could leave the dangerous place. But on their way, they saw a huge parking lot and could not understand where there were so many cars on the street. They realized that there were living people there who could have a lot of supplies. Therefore, they could be robbed, but they had to be careful. But they did not know what danger awaited them there. Having carefully examined everything, they realized that it was a greenhouse, but immediately heard a strange sound. The men were very scared because they thought that now they would die. But as it turned out, it was an ordinary pig. But how did it get here? Now, they tried to catch it so that they would have meat and normal food. Altogether, they tried to throw the animal to the ground in order to slaughter it. They were so happy that they were already thinking about how they would cook it and what dishes they would eat. Night came, so they had to return. After the sortie, they were all very tired, but that day, they worked well. But they did not even notice that there was no light in the house despite the fact that it was night outside. The men started shouting to check if there were people in the house. After a few minutes, when there was no sound, they realized that everything was wrong. They got ready and tried to go inside to check what had really happened. However, there were no traces of robbery in the house, and everything remained intact. The teacher got ready to go first, but it had to be done very quietly. One by one, they started moving up the stairs. The master listened. He tried to understand what had really happened. After that, the man started smiling. Now they had no doubt. There were indeed enemies in the house who had to be killed. Suddenly, a bright light turned on, blinding them. It was their friends who were waiting for them and preparing to meet. As it turned out, they managed to restore the electricity, and now they were going to brag about it. When Li Hongxing climbed the building, he immediately realized what had happened. Now they learned to use solar energy, which they converted into electricity. They also closed all the curtains so that no light could penetrate through them. As it turned out, the girl still had not started talking and was very afraid. The fact is that she was too scared. Everyone hoped that the girl would overcome her fear and finally be able to speak. But when she saw the pig, she started talking to it. Everyone was very happy when they saw it. Now the girl wanted to give it a name. After that, they prepared dinner and discussed how much stock they had left. To get meat, they wanted to slaughter a pig, but the girl was against it and started screaming. Evening came and Wang heard that his ex had become unwell. He decided to check how she felt and what was happening to her. Therefore, he gave her vitamins, which had many minerals and valuable substances that were lacking in her body. But she refused, which shocked him a lot. She just turned around and left, along with her new boyfriend. And the hero stayed and tried to restrain himself so as not to explode with anger. But he understood that if Hu Hao Ran saw him, they could quarrel again. And he was right, because the man really saw everything with his own eyes. But instead, he just hugged the girl and did not attach any importance to it. The guy calmed down a little because he did not want her to have problems because of him. He had no other choice, so he decided to just leave. Until the very morning, he could not fall asleep, so he just read a book almost all night. The next morning, they decided to go to a car service, where they hoped to find a lot of spare parts and supplies. They took absolutely everything that came across their path and even disassembled new cars. They also tried to remove the tires and wheels. After that, they equipped their own car with large wheels because it was much safer than ordinary ones. Yes, they could protect themselves from the zombies that roamed the streets. In addition, they were going to replace many other parts so that their car would become more powerful. Meanwhile, the events moved to the bandits' base. The bandits noticed that the pigs had disappeared, so they began to punish those who were supposed to be watching them. They found traces and went on reconnaissance, so they learned about the main characters who stole the pig. The chief immediately ordered to take people and go to their house to take away what belonged to them. Therefore, a group of men armed themselves and went to the same house. Meanwhile, the main characters continued to equip their own car. They checked every detail and wanted everything to turn out as it should. Sun Chen was sitting on duty when suddenly she noticed a car that started to approach them. It stopped right in front of them, and from the inside, armed and aggressive men started to climb out. In addition, they started to break down the gate to get inside. Sun Chen tried to contact the men and tell them what had happened. And when they found out that there was trouble at home, they started to gather and hurry back. Their house was protected, but the fences were not designed for living people. The man tried to calm the people who started to panic. He made everyone shut up and listen to him carefully. Now, he spoke to the bandits who had already entered his house. The old man wanted to discuss everything calmly, but the bandit did not listen to him and was not going to talk. However, he still made him sit at the same table with him. For some time, they were just silent, and no one dared to speak first. As it turned out, it was the pig. But they did not steal anything, and she came to their house herself. When the girl realized this, she began to break away because she did not want to part with her new friend. In addition, the bandits also noticed that there were old people and women in the house who could not do anything to them. Therefore, they decided to rob them and take the young women with them. But, at this very moment, they saw a weapon that was pointed directly at them. They were ordered to stop, otherwise, people would be forced to defend themselves and open fire. The old man tried to bluff because he understood that it was necessary to stall until the men returned. And instead of weapons, they used ordinary mops and hoped that it would work.